Hello and welcome back to The Anecdotalist, episode 21, which is actually episode 1 of our October Spooktacular. I'm your host, Paul Packard, and with me today, as always, my co-host, Jason McKinney.
Hey guys, it's really good to be back. Oh my gosh, I missed last week. It sucked.
Yeah, that was very weird, sitting by myself in a room, talking to nobody. That was a very different vibe than what we're used to. If you're tuning into this episode for the very first time, you've never heard us before, Jason is in South Carolina. I'm in Ohio. In the middle of our episode, the previous episode, we had a hurricane and Jason lost power. Jason lost internet. And so we had to break that into two parts. And then part two, I recorded solo. Jason got internet back yesterday. So we're recording this episode. We finally got him back into it. And we're going to hit the ground running here with our first October Spooktacular episode. With all that said, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, here we go. An omen of death, the Black Shuck, or the Hellhound, stands guard at the edge of the underworld. Sometimes in the churchyard or on the edge of the forest, you'll notice red eyes staring back at you. Too high off the ground to be a dog, but too low to be a person. They belong to an animal said to be large in stature and with shaggy black hair. The Hellhound is sometimes referred to as the Black Hound of Odin. This creature goes by many names, has been seen by many people, and has a place in many cultures. This is the Black Shuck.
As you're reading this opening, all I'm picturing is my wife just listening to this and hearing, oh, it's a big black furry dog. And her first instinct, I can almost guarantee, is to go pet the big black hairy dog. You know, don't mind the red eyes or the fact that it's guarding a cemetery. My wife is going to be thinking, this is a dog. It needs to be petted and taken care of.
Well, your wife probably would die. This thing is an omen of death. And if you see it, it's too late. Okay, so the Black Shuck. What better way to kick off our October Spooktacular than to tell the story of the Black Shuck? And so he actually came up in the history portion of the Rendlesham Forest episode. Do you remember way back one of our earlier episodes? I think episode 3 and 4, our part 1 and part 2, our first UFO episode. We talked briefly about the history of Suffolk, England, and part of that was the Black Shuck, or the Demon Dog, or Hellhound. And so really, whatever you want to call it, there are tons of names for it, but that's what we're talking about tonight.
And honestly, I think the Rendlesham Forest episode was still one of our best UFO episodes. It had so much history to it, and the fact that we're actually even going back and tagging it even now, like what, 12? No, 15. What episode are we on now?
21.
Oh my gosh. So it's like 18 episodes later, we're still mentioning the Rendlesham Forest.
Yeah, no, that's a very good series, and I would go back and definitely listen to it. We had a good time trying to figure out how we're going to record our first UFO episode, and part of that was reading the history or talking through the history of Suffolk, England, which uncovered something else to talk about. So we're kind of going back to Rendlesham in a way. But tonight our plan is to talk about the history of the Black Shuck as well as its many sightings. We'll talk about the culture and then wrap up with our own thoughts. So, the black dog or the black shuck is said to be an omen of death and is often associated with the devil. In English folklore, the creature is mostly associated with the British Isles and the countryside of East Anglia. So, shuck is actually derived from the Old English word skucka, meaning devil or fiend, and in most folklore, it's referred to as being larger than a normal dog, sometimes as large as a cow. It has black, shaggy hair and red or yellow eyes. There's also a version where the beast just has one large eye, like a cyclops, right in the center of its head. But it's funny because there's a lot of different renditions of this, but it all comes back to one theme. It's a big black dog that typically brings an omen of death.
It's so sad that such a nice thing can be such a bad omen. I'm just thinking of my dog is big and black. I just can't see him as an omen of death.
Well, sounds to me like you have a Black Shuck living amongst you. So, not all versions of this creature are terrible, of course. There's this famous story of the black dog that seemed to stalk this 13-year-old boy in Little Winging in Surrey, England, eventually revealing himself to be his parents' friend from their childhood after escaping a prison called Azkaban.
Huh. I wonder where this is coming from. I'm going to guess that the parent's friend was named something black.
Yeah, see? Black Shuck. He's black. Serious black. Well, that's what's funny as I was thinking about it. I mean, that's a part of this, right? They were talked about in the book and of course the movie that seeing that black dog was an omen of death, an omen of something to come. And it's probably loosely based on the Black Shuck, I would assume. I'm sure J.K. Rowling is familiar with that. But jokes aside, we're talking about the Black Shuck, and there's a lot of different folklore and legends that branch off of this creature. So there's a lot to go through here. But yeah, I couldn't help but sneak in some Harry Potter stuff while I was in this. But really, there are actually renditions of this creature serving some good. Of course, most stories, it's a devil dog, but there is a famous story of the creature being referred to as the Old Shep. So, a couple in Hunstanton, England, both died tragically, leaving the dog alone. The husband dies at sea near Yarmouth, and the wife at home in Hunstanton, England. In this variation of folklore, Old Shep, the big, scary, shaggy black dog, roams the countryside, protecting the coast, visiting both graves of its former masters, one in Hunstanton and the other in Yarmouth. So there are renditions of this creature, this black, scary, big dog that roam the countryside that actually are protecting, in this case, the coast. So the earliest rendition of this creature being referred to as a devil dog comes from the Vikings' control of East Anglia. So it was said that Odin sent his hounds, Gary and Freki, to protect the Danes from the Saxons. The Saxons, of course, practicing Christianity and essentially under siege from the pagans, would begin associating Odin's hounds with the devil himself. Of course, this is part of folklore. You have to wonder if hearing or knowing this folklore and then seeing a wild black dog would begin turning legend into reality. So imagine you're under siege by the Vikings, you have Christianity, and you hear these stories of the Danes and these black dogs, and then randomly one day you see a black dog walk across the road and you're like, there it is. I imagine that's how legends kind of begin. Or Odin himself did bring these devil dogs to England.
Yeah, and I'm sure black dogs isn't that uncommon to see in England. So I'm sure the black dog was pretty common animal, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the with anything, right? Like a black cat or a black dog, anything that is going to be roaming around. That's a common thing, like how rats and different things. You can attach folklore to them because you're most likely going to see those creatures, those animals, somewhere at some point. So yeah, it's easy to say if you have this like pagan legend and you just see an animal, a dog, you're going to associate that probably with the legend itself, the lore, and it's going to build on itself. So what I want to do is I want to fast forward a little bit to what's referred to as the Wild Hunt. So the Kingdom of England annexes East Anglia in 917 AD, and some time passes before the first legends of the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is first mentioned in 1127 AD. Some sources claim this was the first hunt altogether. Others, of course, claim the hunt had been going on for years since before humans and that Odin himself led the hunt. But either way, 1127 AD is the date we're going to talk about.
So I've been so curious about this wild hunt legend. Like I have heard about this, and I don't know if you've ever played The Witcher, but the wild hunt is mentioned in The Witcher, and I've always heard legends about the wild hunt. So I'm so glad that we're going over this and to hear a little bit more story behind this.
Yeah, and it's probably something we can make a whole episode about if we wanted to, anyways. This is just going to be a quick excerpt in what we're talking about. But yeah, the wild hunt, it would occur in the changing of the seasons from fall to winter. The myth is that a god and goddess had come to the land to lead a hunt. Over time, this hunt had been recognized as being known as a pack of ghouls, and all black and on horseback, followed by black hounds larger than normal dogs. It was said that dark magic accompanied this pack of hunters, and if you were to get in their way, you could be killed. With all mythology, there are some variations on this. Many believe this was built on the coming of winter, the howling wind, which was treacherous weather, that being caught out in it, one could wind up frozen to death. All that said, there are stories all across Europe from this time that claim that there was a specific incident in which these dark figures ran across the countryside, town to town on this hunt with these evil creatures. And interestingly enough, the Germans, the British, the Scottish, and Scandinavian countries all have variations on this hunt, of which black hounds are said to have been associated.
Wow. So the fact that this legend is going across four different countries, that's a pretty big deal in my opinion.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that Western Europe had a lot of intermingling and impact on culture. I mean, you have this wild hunt, and of course, the changing of the seasons. It's like those stories, the old folklore stories about that kind of like scare kids. It's one of those things where, as winter approaches, the wild hunt. It's time to kind of like at night make sure you're in the house so you don't get caught by the wild hunt. Supposedly, there was an actual 1127 incident. What we'll do is I'll read a quick quote here from Apparitions of Black Dogs, compiled by Dr. Simon Sherwood. And this comes from the Anglo Saxon Chronicle in 1127, and it's supposed to be the earliest English account. Quote, "Let no one be surprised at the truth of what we are about to relate, for it was common knowledge throughout the whole country that immediately after his arrival, referring to Abbot Henry at Poitou, at Abbey of Peterborough, it was a Sunday when they sing Exsurge Quaere, O. D. Many men both saw and heard a great number of huntsmen hunting. The huntsmen were black, huge, and hideous, and rode on black horses and on black he goats, and their hounds were jet black, with eyes like saucers and horrible. This was seen in the very deer park of the town of Peterborough, and in all the woods that stretched from that same town to Stamford. And in the night, monks heard them sounding and winding their horns. Reliable witnesses who kept watch in the night declared that there might well have been as many as 20 or 30 of them winding their horns. As near they could tell, this was seen and heard from the time of his arrival all through Lent, right up to Easter." End quote.
Wow. So this was like seen during an entire season. It wasn't just like a day or two. It was a few months that this was going on?
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that there's the wild hunt that happens kind of like during winter. And in this specific case, supposedly Abbot Henry shows up, and right around that same time, all these people are seeing huntsmen that are black and hideous on he goats, and they keep seeing them over and over and over, and they're seeing them all the way up to Easter. So that's probably what 3 or 4 or 5 months of this hunt going on, and that's the specific 1127 date that we talked about earlier. Is this is a legend you hear about, but the 1127 date specifically, there's a written account and reliable witnesses that said that they saw these creatures on this wild hunt. And that included the black hounds that look like the Black Shuck.
Wow, that is crazy, man. I have to ask you, what in the world is a he goat? I just imagine somebody running around with a sword on a goat.
I'm thinking more like a half man, half goat.
Half man, half goat.
Yeah, he goat.
That gets even more awkward.
But I think it just goes to show you that the Black Shuck, or like the demon dogs, or the black dogs, whatever you want to call them, they come up in many different ways, and typically there's some kind of lore associated with them altogether. And I want to also talk about some of the origin stories of the Black Shuck here before we get deeper into this episode. The first one is a famous sighting in the 14th century in Southey, which borders Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. Monks came to build a church, and so during which they were attacked and had their throats slit. So the abbot of Ely, he sent some armed men to look for the murderers, but they couldn't find them. And so they end up enlisting these wolves to guard the monks as they built this church. The problem arose when they began running out of food, and they began digging up and eating corpses of the villagers in town. So once they ran out of corpses, they began eating and attacking the living. So people started fleeing, and what was left was the wolves by themselves, and they had this taste for humans. But once they ran out of food to eat, they began eating each other. and what was left was a single lone massive female wolf. So some time passes, and a villager finds this wolf almost dead on the side of the road. It's malnourished, and he brings her in. And so he and his wife, they nurse this thing back to health, and she becomes domesticated. And so she disappears for a while and comes back bloodied like she had been attacked. But she was also pregnant. And the monks were like, okay, that's Satan's work because there's no wolves in the area. This wolf shouldn't be pregnant. And the fact that this giant beast was bloodied and looked like something had taken advantage, that's not, looked like something had like attacked it and I guess impregnated it. They're like, it's got to be Satan's work. So then she gives birth to this otherworldly creature, and it's said to be as big as an ox, and it resembles neither dog nor wolf. And the creature was said to go hunting, and it would bring back full-sized deers and stags in its mouth. And so the townspeople just got used to this thing, and it was fairly domesticated. It didn't bother anybody. It was like this giant, black, scary dog creature thing that could kill and eat stags. And so one day, a troop of armed men, they arrive in this town, and one of the guys sees the creature, and he remembers back to the stories of how the wolves were attacking the villagers and eating the villagers. And he thinks, oh crap, I gotta do something. So he gets out his spear, and once he gets his spear out, like he's gonna attack this wolf, this dog creature thing, the Black Shuck sees it and it pounces on this guy and it tears his throat out and basically eats him. So all the armed men are like freaking out. They see one of their guys on the ground being eaten by this giant, massive creature thing. And so they all grab their bows and arrows and they all shoot arrows at it. They strike the beast and they kill it. And so it lets out this like blood curdling screech. It's like, how? And it's said now that since then, that each year on the anniversary of its death, it returns to the village. And if you hear its howl or you see this creature, it's an omen of death and that you'll be dead within the year. So this is another origin story of the Black Shuck. Is this town that had this otherworldly Satan dog thing that was kind of friendly at first, that once it was killed, it started coming back on the day of its death to basically claim a villager.
Wow, man, that is a scary story. All I can say is that my wife must be related to the villagers that decided to take care of this wolf.
Yeah, she has a heart for domesticating wild animals. That's great. That's always good.
Yeah, but this is pretty, I mean, this is kind of cool though. Like when you think about it, you take in this dog, it is like this ultimate like wolf that has killed a bunch of other wolves, and you tame it, and it is just like, I mean, I wouldn't mind having an oversized wolf in my house. As long as it's like a good dog and does what I tell it to do.
I mean, that'd be great, but the fact that it was like a Satan spawn, I'd probably be a little weary of allowing it in my house. Maybe the mom, you nurse it back to health, and that's cool. But then once she gets impregnated by Satan, I think you just kind of cut ties at that point. Like, you know what? It was fun while it lasted. You can, go do your own thing. Don't eat me or any of my friends.
You take it out in the backyard and you're just like, all right, buddy, it was good knowing you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that would help. You're going to need a priest to get it done, or a group of armed men that will shoot it with arrows and then release its spirit in the town, which that's even just as bad.
Yeah, just as bad. That doesn't help. You need holy shotgun shells.
Yeah. Get a priest to bless some silver bullets and then shoot it. So let's talk about another famous sighting of the Black Shuck, and this one taking place at a church in Bungay near Suffolk on August 4th, 1577. So this legend was recorded by an English clergyman, Abraham Fleming, about a demon dog that during a terrible storm busts into this church where two people were praying and a bunch of other people were, and it kills the two people. And this story is called The Strange and Terrible Wonder Wrought Very Late in the Parish Church of Bungay. The original story is in Old English. It's really tough to read to some extent, but once you get going, you kind of like get used to how they spell the English and at this time. So I have that in the show notes. You can read it if you like. I'll read a quote from that here in a minute. But basically, there was a terrible storm raging, and people were like losing their minds. It was a really bad storm. And so Fleming states that many thought it was the end of the world. So it got to the point where all these parishioners They're in this church. They're huddled down. It's pitch black. It's storming outside, and they think it's over. And so they're all just huddled in, and they're all praying, and a couple are at the front praying. And so during this, the door just swings open, and there's this black dog standing there in the doorway. And the claim is that the church doors are still charred and marked by the dog. And in a flash, he lunges forward at the two men that are praying, and he, while they're on their knees, wrings both their necks clean backwards in an instant, killing both of them. So then it starts to prowl back, and as it's leaving, it strikes another man on his back, and that guy falls to the ground. But he's spared by the Black Shuck. And during this, the clerk of the church, for some reason, this doesn't make any sense to me. It's in the story. He was cleaning the gutters outside for some reason. And this is all happening while the dog is attacking and killing the congregation. And the clerk is just on the on the roof. Storm is raging, and he's cleaning the gutters. And he's struck by lightning. Quote, with a violent clap of thunder, was smitten down, and beside his fall, and no further harm, unto whom, being all amassed this strange shape, whereof we have before spoken, appeared, howbeit he escaped without danger. End quote. You kind of get what I'm saying about the Old English. But this guy is on the roof for some reason during this crazy bad storm. It's so bad that people are in the church praying. He's out there cleaning the gutters. He gets struck down by lightning, falls off the roof, and is still spared. But just a wild story. Just imagine all this. But this is one of the earliest renditions of the Black Shuck, and it's a very famous one, and a lot of legends spring out from this one. The whole point of the story is what it was such a strange and wonderful event, and that it's supposed to scare Christians into being good and holy, and that the devil lurks everywhere. And we'll get into it here deeper in a second. But this guy was smitten or smoten or however you want to say it, smutton. He was struck down.
I was supposed to say Spudden is a little different, isn't it?
Yeah, we're not talking about that. He was struck down and survived by the hand of the mercy of God, basically. And he actually is the one that twists this story into something bigger than it is, because we'll talk about this here in a second. And the real story, there's this terrible storm, and it's in the records that these two people were struck by lightning and killed that day. The records show they were killed by lightning in the bell tower, and a third was badly injured. So these three guys were in the bell tower, struck by lightning during this terrible storm. Two of them died. One of them fell from the tower or whatever and survived. And so this record kind of indicates that Fleming took the opportunity to expand on these deaths, and he took some legend of a demon dog and added it to this story that he heard about of this church being struck by lightning. And so he kind of twists it into this bigger thing. And so it's not so much that he doesn't believe it himself, it's that he actually is creating this legend himself. Supposedly, that's what kind of this alludes to.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah. So the University of Michigan has a digital copy of this manuscript by Fleming. And so if you want to, it'll be in the show notes. You can read it on there. It's in Old English. So it's kind of tough to read. Actually, I'm not sure if it's considered actually Old English. It's older English than now English. I don't know if it's actually old English in the actual sense, but it's difficult to read to some extent because some of the lettering and some of the words are not the same that we use today. So just kind of get through that. But you can actually understand it if you go to read it.
Like smitten.
Yeah, I don't think smitten that wasn't in the manuscript. I just said it. Past tense for smite. So this is actually probably the biggest legend surrounding the Black Shuck. And so Fleming, he goes on to verify the authenticity of the story, claiming testimonies and witnesses. And he describes that the marks from its claws and talons that were left not only on the door, but also in the stone. And he mentions the destruction of the tower, that the clock was blown to pieces and wires and wheels still hanging from the tower. Additionally, he claims others witnessed the beast at another church about 7 miles away in Blibbery. This creature was wreaking havoc in churches all over the area and taking advantage of the storm that struck fear in the people. Again, though, his witnesses and his testimonies and the evidence, easily could be twisted from just a lightning strike on the church. Of course, a lightning strike is going to blow the wires and wheels off the tower. it's not going to be the same exact thing as a black shuck or a demon dog. You can claim that, but you can also say, okay, that's obviously evident of a lightning strike. But since we're kind of suspending our disbelief here for a little bit and talking about a legend, we'll stick to it.
Yeah, I mean, we as Christians believe in demons. It could be that maybe a black dog got possessed by a demon and was just hitting the churches for some reason. Although I don't think demons can demons go in churches? I don't know if they can do that.
I don't know. Are they like vampires where you gotta invite them in?
No, it's holy ground. It should be, I would think.
Yeah, you'll have to research your demon dog authority. Anyways, okay, so let's get back to it. Another famous sighting of the Black Shuck kind of spins out from this dueling death of Henry Hobart. So this guy is the fourth baronet of Blickling Hall in 1698. And supposedly, Hobart has spent like this huge, enormous fortune on his political aspirations, only to fall short, believing that it was due to a rumor of his cowardice during the Boyne campaign. So he blames his neighbor, as you do, Oliver Leneve. And it's not like he walked down his driveway and was like, hey, it's your fault. It's 1698. His neighbor is just a fellow landowner at this time. So Oliver challenges Hobart to a duel. He's like, all right, if you're going to attack my character and you're going to just claim that you lost this because of me, I'm going to challenge you to a duel. So they meet on this hill, and Hobart is said to be the superior swordsman. However, he strikes at Oliver and he wounds Oliver, but his sword gets stuck in Oliver's jacket. So Oliver has the upper hand for a moment, and he fatally stabs Hobart in the stomach, and he dies the next day at Blickling Hall. So, according to legend, this dog shows up during the funeral and sits at the feet of the sexton, who is basically just the gravedigger or the guy that looks over the churchyard. And it just whines the whole time during the funeral. So, Hobart, he gets buried the next day, and his body is found spat out of consecrated soil. So, it's been essentially exhumed, and it's just laying on the ground next to the hole that was dug for it. And so they're like, okay, this is his body. He's too evil. He can't be buried here on the church grounds. So they bury him in common ground, which is basically just dirt outside the church. And once again, the earth spits him out. So they're like, we got to do something about this body. And they weigh it down with stones and they toss him in the lake. Problem solved. So about a week later, the keeper of the estate, he's fishing in that same body of water for whatever reason. I mean, there's a dead guy in there, but he's fishing. And he catches what's described as this monstrous eel, this huge eel. So he takes it to the cook, and the cook's like, all right, yeah, I'll cook it up for you. And he puts it in the pot. And so when his back is turned to it, the eel essentially like comes back to life and starts thrashing around inside this pot. So the pot overturns and the eel falls out, and like kind of in an instant, the eel's gone, just disappears. And what's standing there in its place is a black dog, a black shuck.
Nah, man, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'd be like, all right. I'd take off my apron.
Yeah.
Like, all right, I'm out. It's all you.
You're trying to cook an eel in a lake that had a dead body in it, and you get what you deserve. I mean, if you're gonna cook a fish in a small body of water that you just dumped a body in, you kind of get what's coming to you.
I feel like that's kind of like a bad idea to begin with, because whatever that fish has been drinking in that water or eating in that water, I mean, I don't know. I guess there's plenty of dead bodies out in the ocean right now, and we eat fish from the ocean all the time. I guess.
Yeah, but that's a massive body of water. Yeah, I think we're talking about a small lake here, and they just dumped the guy. I mean, a week ago. You got to imagine any fish that you're going to catch had nibbled on him at some point. I would assume. And well, this one definitely because the spirit of this guy is in this eel.
He also says that this is a monstrous eel. How do you fit a monstrous eel in a pot?
I think it's like a giant pot because they're going to feed whoever lives there at this hall. They have this giant pot they toss this thing in, and it starts thrashing around. It becomes a demon dog. But what I want to quote the 1926 book Roundabout Norfolk and Suffolk by F.J. Merrick. Quote, a great wonder followed. A black dog, as slippery as an eel, appeared. A black dog with a dead man's eyes. No one could bring that dog to heel, nor trap it, nor poison it. And while it was abroad, a dark curse hung over the hall, the farm, the whole estate. End quote. Again, I mean, this black dog, it's said to have the spirit of this man. They could see the spirit of Hobart, this evil person. They could see his eyes in this dog. And what's really interesting is they end up getting this guy from London to come, and he's this famous wizard, which I didn't realize they had famous wizards at the time, but they did. And he captures the Shuck by whistling a sequence of like 7 whistles. And he has this wand, and he trains the wand on the dog. And he leads it to the southeast turret and sends it in before the village masons build up the door. They basically brick the door up. And what's really interesting about this is when I was reading through this, the gist of what I understood was that I guess the spirit of the dog itself was trainable, but the evil person that was kind of stuck in the dog was kind of under this like spell in a way from this wizard. But the spirit of this dog basically is taking the command of this human and it kind of overpowering the evil that's inside of it. So he's able to entertain the dog side of this creature and train the dog side of this creature to listen to him. And so he gets it into this turret, and then they break up the turret, and this dog is just inside there with Hobart. And so the story actually does not end there. So in 1860, 160 years later, the squire's sisters were in this drawing room, and they see this dog, this black dog, suddenly appear. And they're like, "Why is this dog in here?" And it runs across the room, and it goes hiding behind this curtain. And they pull the curtain back, and it's gone. And they're like freaking out about this dog, and they ask the squire. It turns out the day before, the squire had unbricked the turret, not knowing the history of Hobart's evil spirit being trapped in the turret. He accidentally lets this thing go, and his sisters see it. And without knowing the history or the story of it, they see this ghost black dog, and they tell him about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, I unbricked that turret the other day." And supposedly someone's like, "Hey, by the way, the evil spirit of that dog from 160 years ago, it was in there, and you let it out."
He's like, "Great going. Now Hobart's going to be around the grounds again. Thanks a lot."
Yeah. Now the evil spirit of Hobart is just kind of roaming around the grounds of a Blickling Hall.
Great going, Squire. He should be fired.
And yeah, and we actually let him go.
No one put a sign up like, "Hey, don't unbrick this turret."
Yeah. Don't open, demon inside. And just over 100 years it's faded away. You'd think.
It's not a bad idea.
So this thing has been seen like several times since in our like current era. And so there's a story of an airman in World War II who saw it. And then guests who visits the hall today, when they go, sometimes they see this black dog roaming the grounds still. And it's really interesting because when I was thinking about this earlier and I was reading through some of this, it reminds me of some of the ghost stories we talk about when we do our ghost episodes. And you tell the story of something that happened in the past, and then you can tie it all the way forward to now. And someone's like, "Hey, I saw that black dog. Whose black dog is that running around?" And the tour guide's like, "Oh, that's Hobart. He was killed in a duel 200 years ago or 300 years ago. And he still roams around. He's kind of our mascot in a way." But you know what I mean? It's kind of funny that there are stories of guests who see this dog running around the grounds that doesn't really exist. And if you go all the way back to 1700, or what was it, 1698, when this first happened, and there's this like legend, it's kind of weird that you can then fast forward, I mean, 300 years, and you can point back to a legend that you're seeing with your own eyes today, which is wild.
That is wild. That is so cool when you think about it, though. The fact that this legend survives 300 years. So it also kind of makes you wonder if maybe there's just a lot of black dogs in this area.
Probably a lot of strays out this way. So we're at the part of the episode we're gonna just kind of talk about what we think. So this is a little different than what we do in the past. Typically, we talk an unsolved mystery or a ghost story or UFO. We give our own opinions. And since we're in October Spooktacular and we're kind of hanging our hats on some legends this month, we can still talk about what we think. So, Jason, what do you think about the Black Shuck?
I think there's so many different legends that you gotta wonder if maybe one of them has some truth behind it. You know,
Yeah.
like of course like I said, it is a black dog. It's kind of like seeing a black cat. Like they're pretty common, but the fact that there's so many different legends, and the fact that they're so big as well. So I kind of wonder if maybe animals in general were bigger, um, 300, 400 years ago, like than they are now. Do you like? I've always wondered if maybe like through us like killing animals gradually over the years, they've kind of gotten smaller, and so they're not as big. Whereas they used to be really big because they used to be more dominant. We didn't have guns back then. We didn't have like we didn't have as many weapons to like keep these animals at bay. So when they got big, like they could eat. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe a lot of these black dogs over there, like out in the woods, just kind of grew really, really big and like they just created legends.
Yeah. Well, if they're actual wolves, there's a video I saw a long time ago online that was floating around of this dog wolf thing that like stepped out onto this road from the dark side of the road in front of this car, and the thing looked like a monster. It was huge and like grotesque looking and just massive. And there are wolves, I mean, that live in this area, and wolves are significantly bigger than dogs. And so my thought is, I think with any of this stuff, I think with any legends or stories, there's a nugget of truth somewhere in what we talked about tonight. Some of this somewhere happened, and I think when you like you said, when you have so many different cultures talking about the same thing, either A, there's just a lot of black dogs in this area, and maybe like you said in the past, things were a little bit different, but I think something exists here. There was some nugget of truth somewhere along the way of this giant, oversized creature that wreaked havoc in some town. That legend became big, and then now you can build on that legend with, oh, I saw a black dog. Oh, it must be the Black Shuck. Or I saw a black dog, and the next day I crashed my car. Must have been because I saw that black dog. And my grandmother used to tell me that if I saw a black dog, bad things would happen to me. And like, you know what I mean? Like the legend kind of becomes built on some nugget of truth somewhere in the story.
They're like snowballs.
It snowballs, yeah. And so if you say seeing a black cat cross the road in front of you or seeing a black dog in this area, this part of the world means a black omen or a dark omen. And then the next day you stub your toe, you're like, oh yeah, it's because I saw that black dog. You're gonna build on it. You're gonna reason, make a claim of the pain I'm feeling today was because of something outside of my control, and I'm gonna associate it with a legend that I know exists.
Yeah. And it also could, I totally agree that it has to be built off something. There was an incident at some point in time that some village or, some little town was haunted by some big black dog that, he knew there's people here. There he knew that his food, like it wouldn't be hard to kill some people in a town and, kind of just preyed on like villagers for a little while, thus creating this new horror that we have created over the years that's turned into a legend. And it could also be the fact that, parents over here in England, they know that there's danger out in the woods. They know that the wolves out in the woods are very, very dangerous. So they kind of create some stories as well to build on that. That way their kids aren't going out at night. And like this kind of helps instill fear. But it's a very good. I think this is a very good start for our first episode, though, because I love the fact that we're going into October and we have mentioned something that was in Harry Potter. Because I don't know about you, but I love Harry Potter in this time of year, like the fall weather, like and it's Harry Potter. This is like my favorite movie. Was Prisoner of Azkaban. That was my favorite movie. So the fact that we're mentioning this during the Halloween season.
Which one's your favorite book?
Oh man, I haven't read the book since I was like 12. It's like 18 years ago. um, I, I don't know.
I reread them recently, actually.
Oh wow! Don't tell your mom.
Yeah, she doesn't know.
What was your favorite book?
Prisoner of Azkaban. The book's amazing.
Yeah, I loved the movie.
So, thanks again for listening to The Anecdotalist. And so, we are in Spooktacular, where, as a reminder, we plan on having a new episode each week leading into Halloween. And these episodes are a little bit different. They're not our normal UFO, unsolved mystery, ghost story. They're more legends and spooky season style episodes. And our goal is to keep doing this all the way up to Halloween. So, in the meantime, I wanted to wrap up this episode with a quote from the book Highways and Byways in East Anglia by William Alfred Dutt. Quote, he takes the form of a huge black dog and prowls along dark lanes and lonesome field footpaths, where, although his howling makes the hearer's blood run cold, his footfalls make no sound. You may know him at once, should you see him, by his fiery eye. Such an encounter might bring you the worst luck, so you will do well to shut your eyes if you hear him howling. Shut them, even if you are uncertain whether it is the dog fiend or the voice of the wind.